I welcome the opportunity to address the House on the tragic and shocking events we are witnessing in Israel and the occupied Palestinian territory in the aftermath of the heinous attack by Hamas on Israel. I am well aware of the high level of engagement across this House with this issue. In this regard, the Government has tabled a motion on the situation in Israel and the occupied Palestinian territory, and I dealt with that earlier in commending it to the House. But at the outset, I would like to reiterate the Government's sincere condolences to the family of Kim Dempsey and the family of Emily Hand. Their tragic deaths brought home to us all here in Ireland the devastating impact of the Hamas attack on the lives of innocent civilians, including many children and young people with lives full of promise ahead of them. I want first to share some personal reflections on the human impact of these shocking developments. 6 weeks ago, I visited Israel, the occupied Palestinian territory, and Jordan. I met with a wide range of interlocutors, government counterparts, historic and cultural institutions, think tanks and academia, as well as civil society organisations. More fundamentally, I met with people. I met with our partners, I met with friends, all of whom, along with their families and communities, have suffered such a profound shock. My thoughts and wishes are with every one of them. I recall in particular my meeting with an organisation called Parents Circle. This group brings together members of Israeli and Palestinian families who have suffered bereavements in the context of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Some of you here may have read Colin McCann's novel, The Paragon. The novel tells the story of two of the members of Parents Circle. Bassem, a Palestinian father whose 10-year-old daughter was killed by an IDF sniper, and Rami, whose 13-year-old daughter was killed in a suicide bombing in Israel. I sat with Bassem and Rami and Leila and Robbie, both also who lost children, over a meal in Jerusalem. Two Israelis and two Palestinians. They shared stories of terrible loss. They described the challenges they faced in seeking to bridge the divide between Israeli and Palestinian people. They told me about their extraordinary work, telling their stories everywhere, from secondary schools to the chamber of the United Nations Security Council. In the wake of what we have seen, it would be understandable to give up in despair, to lose hope. However, they are bravely continuing with their work and with their message of reconciliation. In their own words, and I quote, "The toll of violence is not just counted in numbers. It is measured in the shattered dreams, the untapped potential, and the irreplaceable bonds severed by these horrifying actions," unquote. During my visit to Israel, I also met with representatives of the Abraham Initiatives, a civil society organisation working to promote dialogue between Jewish and Arab Israelis in mixed towns in Israel. I had a fascinating conversation with a group of Jewish and Arab Israeli local government representatives who had been to Belfast last year. They had come back from that visit convinced that there were ways to work together to tackle the suspicion and discrimination and exclusion that dogs mixed cities in Israel. I learned with absolute horror this week that one of its co-directors, Tabet Abu Ras, who hosted my visit, lost 8 family members last week following a strike on North Gaza. His aunt, who's 83 years old, is among those ordered to evacuate North Gaza. She does not have the capacity to do so. Yet against this harrowing backdrop, the Abraham Initiatives also continues to promote its message of peaceful coexistence. Just days before the Hamas attack, Sonia McGuinness, our ambassador to Israel, attended and spoke at a joint march and rally of 4,000 Israeli and Palestinian women. It was organised jointly by an Israeli movement called Women Wage Peace and their Palestinian counterpart, Women of the Sun. These movements were formed in the aftermath of the war in Gaza in 2014 to promote reconciliation between the two sides. They were marching to call upon leaders to get back around the table, to restore a political horizon, to engage in dialogue, to find solutions. They were doing so for the sake of all Israelis and all Palestinians. One of their leading campaigners, Vivian Silver, who lived in a kibbutz that was attacked by Hamas, has been missing since the day of the attack. She may be amongst the hostages being held in Gaza. The 84-year-old mother of another member of Women Wage Peace is confirmed among the hostages. And yet, even in the face of such personal anguish, Women Wage Peace have made their position clear, and I quote, "Despite the rage and pain in the face of the criminal acts committed by Hamas, including incessant shelling of towns all over Israel, we must not lose human dignity. It is our obligation as mothers, women, human beings, and as an entire nation not to lose these values," unquote. To all such organisations, I want to say that to promote reconciliation in the immediate aftermath of such outrage and personal loss is utterly brave and heroic. Your voice is needed, now more than ever, and we will do everything that we can to amplify that voice. Let me reiterate the government's unequivocal condemnation of the attack by Hamas on Israel. The actions that we witnessed were savage and brutal. The indiscriminate killing of civilians going about their daily life, the targeting of young party-goers at a music festival, the seizing of hostages, including children and elderly people. These are reprehensible actions, and I've been absolutely clear that all hostages, Israeli and international, must be released unconditionally. I have underlined that there is no justification, none, for such terror. In a letter to Foreign Minister Cohen on the 8th of October, I expressed Ireland's deepest condolences to the Israeli people, and I've spoken with the Israeli ambassador here in Ireland and also with the chair of the Jewish Representative Council of Ireland. There is an immense sense of shock and trauma amongst the Jewish and Israeli communities here in Ireland. The solidarity and support of the Irish people is both needed and valued at this time. The situation has also directly affected Irish citizens in both Israel and the occupied Palestinian territory. My department, including our missions on the ground in Tel Aviv, Ramallah and Cairo, and our consular crisis team at headquarters, has been working tirelessly over the past 10 days, providing assistance and advice. This consular work remains a high priority. We continue to urge citizens currently in Israel, the occupied Palestinian territory, or Lebanon, to register with the relevant embassy, and we are advising against all travel to Israel, the occupied territories and Lebanon. The Department of Foreign Affairs officials are also in constant contact with our citizens in Gaza and with all relevant authorities in respect of their cases. We are also closely coordinating with the European Union and other states that have citizens in Gaza. I know also that all of us empathise deeply with the enormous fear and anxiety expressed by Palestinian students based in Ireland for their families back home, including many who are here on Irish Aid Fellowship programmes. Last Ceann, I have also underlined that, in line with international law, Israel has the right to defend itself against attack. However, this must be done within the parameters of international humanitarian law. It is vital that we distinguish between Hamas and the Palestinian people, including Palestinian civilians in Gaza. This is very well understood here in Ireland, but I am concerned at the commentary in some international media coverage and on social media that blurs this distinction. There is also a role for the Palestinian Authority to play in communicating this message at an international level. This is a point I emphasised during my calls early last week with Palestinian Foreign Minister Malki and the Secretary-General of Fatah's Central Committee, Jibril Rajoub. I also very much welcome the clear message from President Biden following his call with President Abbas, where he reiterated that Hamas does not stand for the Palestinian people's right to dignity and self-determination. These messages, Tánaiste Micheál, are vital at this time. In view of the deeply alarming situation that is unfolding in Gaza, Water, electricity and fuel supplies into Gaza have been seriously disrupted. Hospitals are running out of power. People are running out of essential supplies. Over 1 million people were given an order to evacuate the north of Gaza by the Israeli military. This is simply unworkable and wrong. Civilian deaths are increasing. We watched in horror the appalling attack on the Al-Ali hospital in Gaza last night. Hundreds of civilians, patients, staff and those seeking shelter from aerial attacks have died. While we do not yet know who was responsible for that strike, we've seen all too clearly the anguish and the pain that it has caused. Let us be unambiguous. As the United Nations Secretary-General has underlined, even wars have rules. International humanitarian law applies in all conflicts, in all circumstances, to state and non-state actors alike. It is not optional, it is obligatory. The protection of civilians is at its core. Addressing the humanitarian situation in Gaza, including through the urgent establishment of humanitarian corridors, has been a key focus of my discussions over the past week with the European Union and regional leaders and United Nations counterparts, including with the Palestinian Authority, the Foreign Minister Safadi of Jordan, and Sheikh Abdullah, the Foreign Minister of the United Arab Emirates. I also spoke on Monday evening with the Commissioner General of the United Nations Relief and Work Agency for Palestine Refugees, UNRWA, Philippe Lazzarini, who has described the situation on the ground in Gaza as an unprecedented humanitarian catastrophe. Tragically, UNRWA has lost 14 of its own staff while carrying out their vital role in Gaza. I extend my heartfelt condolences to their families and to their colleagues. During my call with the Commissioner General, I underlined Ireland's unwavering support. UNRWA and the other UN agencies trying to meet the needs of so many people in desperate situations urgently need new funding. I am announcing this evening an immediate package of €13 million, 10 million for UNRWA and 3 million for United Nations OCHA's Palestine Humanitarian Fund. This is in addition to our core funding already allocated. I urge all European Union and all regional partners to step up now to provide whatever financial support they can to UNRWA, because this is a crisis that simply cannot wait. The government has also made clear that we support an immediate humanitarian pause or humanitarian ceasefire to give space to establish humanitarian corridors to meet the immediate needs of all civilians in Gaza. The United Nations Secretary-General has also been clear in his call for this. The Taoiseach raised this as a priority for Ireland in his discussions with the European leaders at the Emergency European Council meeting last evening, and I will be emphasising this with my Foreign Minister counterparts as we prepare to meet in Luxembourg on Monday. Given the magnitude of the situation in Gaza, it is possible and can be possible to overlook the deteriorating situation in the West Bank, and we must not allow this to happen. The situation remains very tense. Since the Hamas attack on the 7th of October, the United Nations has reported over 60 Palestinian fatalities. There are increasing levels of settler violence, and the West Bank Protection Consortium, who I met during my visit, has reported that 470 Palestinians from 9 communities have been forcibly displaced, transferred in the last 10 days. This includes members of a Bedouin community with whom I met during my visit. We also saw demonstrations last night in Ramallah and other West Bank towns against the PA leadership. The risk of a wider regional escalation is also deeply concerning and must also be the focus of urgent international efforts. Iran has openly warned of the opening of an additional front on Israel's borders with both Syria and Lebanon. Israeli villages in the border region are being evacuated, and additional Israeli forces have been mobilised. Exchanges of rocket fire between militant groups in Lebanon and Syria and the Israeli Defence Forces have already claimed lives, including that of Reuters journalist Issam Abdallah. I spoke earlier today with the Defence Minister of Lebanon, Maurice Saleem. I underlined our concern about the current situation at the Lebanon-Israel border and Hezbollah's role in the conflict. I also discussed the role of our troops in UNIFIL and emphasised the importance of their safety and security. I was very clear with him that an escalation of this conflict serves nobody, and asked him to bring all of his influence to bear to prevent this. I also spoke with the Iranian Foreign Minister on Monday evening and urged him in the strongest terms to bring his influence to bear in avoiding regional escalation and insisting on the immediate and unconditional release of hostages. Iran has a pivotal role to play in avoiding escalation, and our mission in Tehran is repeating these messages in unambiguous terms to the Iranian authorities. I will be undertaking further consultations with key regional actors over the coming days and will emphasise the crucial message of de-escalation in all of my conversations. I welcome the intense diplomatic engagement being undertaken by the United States at this time. Secretary of State Blinken is engaged with several key partners in the region. The visit of President Biden to Israel today is also very significant, although I very much regret that Arab leaders who were scheduled to meet him in Amman will no longer do so. As Minister of Defence, I also remain in close contact with our military team deployed along the Blue Line with the UNIFIL peacekeeping operation in Lebanon. Ireland has a strong and long-lasting connection with UNIFIL, and we have deployed troops to the mission since 1978, and it represents our largest deployment overseas at present with 331 personnel. UNIFIL has made it clear that it is continuing to actively engage with authorities on both sides of the Blue Line to de-escalate the situation. I am, however, concerned that there were hostilities on Sunday along the Blue Line which impacted UNIFIL headquarters. Fortunately, no peacekeepers were in place at the time. All Irish Defence Forces personnel serving in the region are maintaining a high level of vigilance and continue to monitor the developing situation in their respective mission areas, complying with United Nations security precautions. Alaska and Corla, it is important that the European Union also plays a constructive and credible role in this crisis. The European Union has been unequivocal in its condemnation of the attack by Hamas, and I welcome that yesterday's emergency meeting of the European Council also provided an opportunity to reaffirm the European Union's principled position that international humanitarian law applies in all circumstances. The European Union's common foreign and security policy is based on a clear statement that the Union's actions shall be guided by the principles of the United Nations Charter and international law. It is vital that the European Union now charts a unified way forward on the basis of these principles. As I said in the immediate aftermath of the attack, we have a moral and political obligation to chart the way towards a future in which these events cannot be repeated. During yesterday's meeting, the Taoiseach also welcomed Saturday's announcement by the European Commission that it will triple its humanitarian aid to Gaza, bringing the total amount now from the European Union to €75 million. We also underline that Ireland strongly opposes any suspension of development assistance to the Palestinians while the Commission's review is underway. On the wider issue of European Union funding, I was very clear at last week's emergency meeting of the Foreign Affairs Council that continued development and humanitarian support to the Palestinian people is absolutely essential. Overall, the European Union and its member states are consistently, and I think it's worth pointing this out to the House, are consistently the largest donors to the Palestinian people, with total funding at over €691 million in 2023 alone. With regard to the review by the European Commission's development cooperation funding, I have underlined that this needs to take place as rapidly as possible and in close coordination with member states. We cannot forget that 80% of the Palestinian population in Gaza is dependent on international assistance for basic humanitarian and human needs. We remain committed to delivering this vital support to Palestinian civilians, and their needs should continue to be a central part of the overall response to this crisis by the international community. We will remain steadfast in our efforts, advocacy and action to support the protection of those most vulnerable and to maintain support for those suffering the dire consequences of this new phase of violence. Even with the scale and significance of the violence, that has unfolded over the last number of days in Israel and the occupied Palestinian territory, it is important to reflect on the context for Ireland's development and humanitarian assistance to the Palestinian people. The sheer suffering that has been visited on countless civilians compels us to consider our objectives in the region and ensure sustained efforts towards our goals. Ireland's objective is to achieve a just, enduring and stable peace in the Middle East. This foreign policy goal frames and shapes the Irish aid approach to the region. Ireland's programme of assistance is an integral part of Ireland's contribution to a sustainable peace. Ireland's support to the Palestinian people is designed to support the maintenance of space for a two-state solution and reflects our long-standing commitment to the peaceful development of a viable Palestinian state. Ireland's assistance programme to the Palestinians has been in existence since the year 2000. Our assistance programme this year was to amount to 16 million. That will now almost double, following my decision today to allocate a further 13 million euros in the light of the extensive needs in Gaza. The programme of support to the Palestinian people focuses on 4 key areas: supporting state-building efforts, provision of humanitarian relief, the protection and promotion of human rights, and support for Palestinian refugees. One of Ireland's priorities is to strengthen the quality of and access to education, which remains essential to the long-term prosperity of the Palestinian people and a future Palestinian state. This is particularly important in such a young society, where nearly 40% of the population is under 14 years of age. We've also created an Ireland-Palestine Scholarship Programme, a dedicated programme for Palestinian students, supporting up to 25 students a year to undertake a one-year master's level course in Ireland. 22 Ireland-Palestine Scholarship Programme students are taking part in the 2023-2024 round, 11 of whom are from Gaza and 11 from the West Bank. This support provides a vital avenue of access to higher education for talented Palestinian students. I've referred earlier to the anguish many of them are facing now here in Ireland in view of what is happening at home. And we have heard that anguish expressed eloquently by some of those students in the past days. Our programme also focuses on the protection and promotion of human rights. We provide support to Christian Aid Ireland and Trócaire, through whom 16 local Palestinian partners are funded. There is a strong advocacy focus to their work, with an emphasis on civil and political rights and gender issues. The Department of Foreign Affairs also provides direct support to Israeli and Palestinian non-governmental organisations working on issues such as freedom of movement, rule of law, rights of prisoners and detainees, women's rights and democratic development. Our representative office in Ramallah and our embassy in Tel Aviv has developed strong relationships with partners working on these issues over many years. We support the West Bank Protection Consortium, who work with communities in the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, at risk of forcible transfer from their communities, as well as Comet ME, which provides basic electricity services to some of the poorest and most marginalised communities in the occupied Palestinian territories. And as mentioned earlier, funding to UN agencies, particularly UNRWA, is a core part of our programme. Ceann, this is a grave crisis with the potential for further escalation. Our immediate focus must be on preventing further civilian casualties and avoiding the risk of a wider regional escalation. We must also retain a perspective of how to move forward in the longer term. It is critical that statements from the European Union, the United States and other partners retain a perspective of a lasting and sustainable peace based on the two-state solution. In recent years, there have been accusations that this phrase, the two-state solution, has been repeated as a mantra without serious efforts to move in this direction. That cannot continue. If there was a time to reinvigorate the Middle East peace process, it is now. That may seem impossible, but there is no choice. Israelis and Palestinians deserve to live in peace, security and dignity. Palestinian aspirations for statehood and sovereignty are absolutely legitimate and must be taken forward. There is no other way to solve this conflict. Any wider regional normalisation efforts, while welcome, cannot substitute for this core reality. This is a very dark period, but we can draw inspiration from the tremendous courage and conviction of those individuals and organisations I spoke of at the outset. They have suffered as people and as families, and suffered grievously the direct impact of this conflict. Despite everything, they are determined to continue their peace-building efforts in their communities and beyond. It is my sincere hope that the intense regional and international focus on de-escalating the immediate crisis can also act as a catalyst for renewed engagement on achieving a lasting and sustainable peace. Ireland is doing and will do everything possible to contribute to this. I can give this House my personal assurance that I will be working tirelessly to exert every possible influence within the European Union, with regional partners and at the United Nations to bring this about. Thank you very much indeed.